Salvatore Dibenedetto, my mother's father, was married to Filippina Palazzolo, and she spelled it P-A-L-A-Z-Z-O-L-O. The story goes that she died of a broken heart because of her 5 children. Only one remained in Italy. 4 of them had come to America. That included my mother, her sister Nunzina, her brother Niccolo, whom we called Coco, and her brother Jack, who had been here in America before the other 3 came. All of mail was stopped during the war, so that the family here never learned of her death until after the end of World War I in 1918. By that time, they had been here about 5 years. They came in 1913. So that was the end of Filippina. They never got to see their mother again. Salvatore continued. He lived on into his 90s, so I had the opportunity of getting to know him through the mail. There were letters exchanged. My mother constantly wrote letters to her father. She would, when I got a little older, she would write little notes for me in Italian that I would read, and she taught me how. And then the other thing, which was fun, she and I would go to a little recording studio from time to time, and we would record a disc. Badolato è nato il giorno 29 di agosto nell'anno 1844. Actually, a phonograph record. We would speak into it. We had little speeches prepared. She would take the disc when it was made and mail it to my grandfather in Italy, and he was able to hear his daughter's voice and his granddaughter's voice. So that was a treat for me, certainly, and it was a treat for him. My grandfather, Dibenedetto, lived on into his 90s. He lived all his life, and he died in the family home in the town of San Giuseppiato, which is a province of Palermo in Sicily. The house is on a street called Via Normani. The eldest daughter, the only one who remained there, Filippina, who eventually married her husband, Ferdinando La Barbera, and she and her husband lived in the house with my grandfather until the time of his death and on. My grandfather lived until sometime during World War II. So again, it being another world war, they had no communication during the war, so they never learned of his death until the end of World War II, which would have been 1945. So by that time, my mother, Marietta Dibenedetto, learned that her father had died during World War II. Of course, by that time, she was Mary Badolato. But anyway, my mother, my father, and 2 other siblings returned to visit the house where my mother was born. Filippina and her husband were still living there at the time. And of course, the purpose of the trip was to try to settle whatever there was of the estate, which was the house and property that was still in the family name. They were able to stay 3 months because they had a home base, the house where they were born, and they did travel all through Italy at that time. Mother told wonderful stories of having been to the major cities and the Isle of Capri, and they did have a good trip, which eventually turned out to be rather sad because they decided, those who were coming back to America, decided that the property should be sold while they were there. So they made arrangements, and they found a buyer, and the arrangements included the fact that the eldest sister, Filippina, who had lived there all her life, and her husband, could remain in the house, in a portion of the house, as long as they lived. They had no children, so there was no one left there to inherit anything. And the ones who had come from America sold it the Filipina had to approve the sale too. She was one of the heirs, but she did it with great displeasure, and by the time they left there, having sold the house, there were ill feelings. And I remember Mother coming back afterwards when she came back from Italy, and seeing her cry because she had left her sister to the point where they weren't even speaking to one another again. I have to tell you something interesting about their trip, though. Mother and Father, my mother and my dad and Nunzina and her brother Jack and his wife went over, they crossed over from New York to Italy on the way to their family home, and the ship they sailed on was called the Saturnia. Well, on the return trip, they were not coming back on the same ship. They were coming back on a new ship called the Andrea Doria, which had made a maiden voyage over to Italy. And it was a lovely trip back, a nice new ship. And Mother came back and was telling us about the trip back. Well, within months of that trip, there was a big news flash one morning on television. The Andrea Doria was sunk. So it was a big drama for my mother that this ship she had sailed across on shortly after that was sunk. We do have a baggage receipt, so there's a little bit of drama to go along with that, with this ship which was eventually sunk out of the New York harbor. The other pictures of that house that you will see were taken in 1994 when my husband Bill and but we made a trip to Italy, and my main purpose was to go to find the places of my parents' birth. We did get to San Giuseppeado, the same house we've been talking about, and we do have pictures of some of the same. We have a balcony scene which shows it in 1994, in 1953. We have pictures of the entry taken at 3 different times in our lifetimes. And I just think you'll really enjoy seeing those pictures. I was able to go into the house where my mother was born, where my grandparents had lived, the house that I had heard so much about, Via dei Normanni. It's called the Road of the Normans, and I suppose that goes way back in history. I recognized the street from pictures, and it was just unbelievable. You talk about going back in history. I remember from as a child seeing pictures of this street, and then when my parents went, seeing the pictures they took in the 50s. And here we were in the 90s doing it. So it was great, it was great. And then just going up to that door and knocking, we had no way of forewarning them we were coming. These 2 women, mother and daughter, who were living in a portion of the house. When they opened the door and I explained in my Italian as best I could who I was, why I was there, that I was the daughter of Marietta. And she said to me, the first thing she said to me in Italian was that I was my mother's daughter, that she just knew, she could tell that I was Marietta's daughter. And then so she told us stories about what she remembered of the family, and of course a lot about my grandfather. She was there when he died, and they were very young, and they had been helpers. They helped with chores, and they helped take care of my grandfather. She told us stories about that, and she gave us some figs, a little plate of figs, which were from their garden. So it was very dramatic. What can I tell you? I get goosebumps just thinking about it. The one thing she told us, which I did not like hearing, was that I said something about Filipina took good care of him. She was the eldest daughter who stayed with him. And she said, no. She said, they did not treat him well when he got old. She said, as long as he was younger, it was fine. She said, she just shook her head and she said, no. non l'ho trattato buono, she said. And it hurt to hear that, because I'm glad my mother wasn't here to hear it, because she would have really been, you know. So, that's another family story.